Testing, testing. Can everyone hear us? Hello, Dolores, how are you?
I'm fine, and I hear well.
Oh, good. I'm glad you can hear us.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
You can hear? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Walsh. Everyone can hear. Hello, everyone. I call our Select Board meeting to order tonight, Tuesday, December 12th at 7:01 p.m. A motion to open the meeting.
So made.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Roll call, please. Mr. Gito.
I'm here.
Mr. McCrisky.
I think I'm here.
Mr. Carrara.
Here.
Mr. Vice Chair Cavey is absent tonight due to the emergency, and I am here. I ask all to stand if you're able to salute our flag. In accordance with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, which extends the Governor's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GLC 30A, Section 20, until March 31st, 2025. This meeting will be conducted both in person and virtually via Google Meets. The meeting will be recorded by SMAC Cable Television and broadcast live and may be live streamed at www.stoughtontv.org. A recording of the meeting, transcript, or other comprehensive record of the proceeding will be posted on the town's website and or SMAC as soon as possible after the meeting if the live broadcast or live streaming is unsuccessful. Times are approximate and items may be taken out of order at the chair's discretion. With that said, let's move right along to item number 2, Select Board comments. Are there any Select Board comments?
Madam Chairman, through you to the public, we had a nice parade the other night, Saturday night, December 6th. Deborah and I partook. It was nice. Tom was there. All our dignitaries, Walter Timilty, Galvin, Ted Phillips, Joe Bayeda, the superintendent of schools, and the chairman of the school committee was there. I can't remember her name. Kathleen Weissman. Yeah, it was a nice time. It was a little weird walking at night, but it was. I saw a lot of happy faces. I don't know about you, Deb, but there was a lot of people happy out there that night. The weather was just right. So I just want to say I was humbled and I had a good time.
We did have so much fun. There were a couple of employees and residents that were dressed up. I didn't even recognize who they were until later on that evening. I got a chuckle out of that.
I didn't mention that. Roberta Harbeck, they were the Peanuts crowd with Bobby Desmond, Peter Ventresco, Fran Brutaniti, my wife, the town clerk. It was quite a thing, and I didn't even get to see them because we were so far ahead of them. But thanks to the fire department, the police department, everything they did, it was very well run. And Matt Carshon.
That's right. Matt, you're the greatest.
And
Matt,
Dave
rock.
Walsh, he was walking the place too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Carrera. Are there any other Select Board comments? Mr. Gito.
Couple. I may leave a little early this evening. Just want to let you know that. I would like to put on our next agenda, if you could, whether or not we could include the post office and websites on either the town manager's objectives or just to be able to discuss them from time to time as we have our meetings, along with the other things that I think you've put in here, the operating budget. No, you had something with the town manager's objectives, I think, on the agenda before. So that's my request.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gito. Mr. McCrisky.
Well, just a follow-up to that, because we voted to take no further action on the post office. It was less than enjoyable. If there's new information that we didn't have then, I wouldn't be inclined to support moving forward. I don't know why. We spent a lot of time, money, conversations, and we got nothing. To the point that the post office, when they referred to their own location, listed it as Washington Street. That kind of shows me their commitment to want to work with a town where they don't even know the address to their own post office. So, I mean, through you, Madam Chair, the town manager, is there anything new that we have on, it's worth talking to the federal government on something that was futile during the last few years?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, there's not a lot to report other than, as you participated in this, Joe, the congressman has agreed to work with the Postmaster General to see if they would consider one of 5 locations to relocate this post office to a more convenient location for citizens and a smaller retail shop versus a big distribution center. Pam McCarthy wrote to the congressman's office a week or 2 ago to ask for an update so we don't get lost, as you've seen, Joe, in the past. We don't get lost in the shuffle. So all the marbles are in the congressman's court right now to determine whether the Postmaster General will agree to change the location of the post office and the size of the post office. But to Joe's point, we have not got any new information other than the last legislative meeting we had with them.
Well, if that's the case, I'd rather wait. I have all the trust. If anybody could get the post office to come to the table, would be the congressman. And so I would not want to take any votes on it until there's a reason to take a vote. And that would be based on the congressman's word that we should start this conversation again. So
I agree.
I'd wait to hear from him.
I agree completely. I think what Mr. Gito's asked for is just an update, and I just gave it. And that is the update.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
Mr. Gito, or any other updates, or were we
well,
at Mr. McCrisky?
The reason that I suggested the post office and the website was that I knew that we had given our congressional delegation that information, and so it seemed to me that we were embarking on doing something there, that we're beginning to have an interest in going back to that and doing something. And I don't want to debate the issue this evening, but I at least want to defend the reason for my suggesting that it be on the agenda. Because, quite frankly, it is an extremely important piece of the downtown. And if we don't do something with that, then in fact it's probably going to be worse than our not doing something on the hole in the ground or the theater. I mean, it is pretty much a central location for something good that could happen. And so that's the only reason that I suggested, or the only reasons that I suggested putting it on the agenda. I don't really care to debate it this evening, but I would like to debate it at some time. And I believe the first meeting that I had when I got on this board almost 2 years ago was to raise that issue. And I got the same response at that time. I hope that I don't get it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gito. I understood completely why you wanted added to the list. And informally, when I talked with Mr. Coulter, we decided that until we develop a process, a final process, if there is any information to share, any updates, it would go on the list. So I understood. So thank you very much. And the website, yes, absolutely. It's needs to be discussed because we have a lot of things we want to say about the website and where is it? It's a beautiful website, but it's kind of challenging to navigate, and we all agree about that. Anyone else want to make comments? So that leads me to my comment, and I was planning to ask, and I'm asking now, Mr. Coulter, are there any items that we need to pay attention to that are because of year end, that's calendar year end, that is, such as become a member of Cedar Hill Golf Club, golf course or golf club because the membership rates are going to increase, or anything like that before year end? I'm just preparing for year end.
Sure. Well, that's a good one. Cedar Hill Golf Club, the rates are going up moderately, very moderately. And that's on the website for Cedar Hill, that announcement. And there's been a mailing to their members to update them to beat that deadline. So you were out in front of that one, Madam Chair, and we appreciate that. Because the fiscal year is July 1st, the calendar year isn't as meaningful to us. But there are things like that that we are notifying people of now in anticipation of the new fiscal year. And I'm about to make some announcements that are all around the end of the fiscal year with regard to payments on taxes and so forth like that. But again, everything we do is around the fiscal year. So the most important thing for us is the budget. That's due to you. My budget is due to you by December 31st. We're going to have it to you on the 29th, of course. And then you have those 2 weeks to amend my budget and turn it into your budget, and then it goes to the FinCom. So that is probably the single most critical date, and we have been working department heads very hard to meet deadlines with respect to their operating budgets, their capital budgets, changes in prior years, head count. Every day there's a new information request. So you're right, it's a very busy time of year, and I think we are on top of everything that needs to be done. I can tell you everybody was on top of the Christmas party. They knew when that was going to be, and they prepared and celebrated for it. So I think we're on top of things. If anything else comes up, I'll certainly let the members know. We do have many issues going on that I would not bring to this board, some really great, and I think it's what Lou's asking that we talk about, and some very concerning that don't rise to the level of a public meeting, but they're things that you should be briefed on. And I'll make it a point between Christmas and New Year's. It's typically a slow week to call each one of you and go through issues that may not be public knowledge, but that you need to be aware of. And I'll make those calls Christmas week. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And we do have a couple of public information sessions coming up in January. And as soon as we finalize those, I don't want to give away what's coming down the pike, but you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be informative, but we're trying to nail down some dates before we make the announcements.
We did nail them down today.
Oh, okay.
Let's not announce it tonight, but we will announce
Yes.
2 public information sessions, one in January, one on February 1st. The one in January.
Excuse me.
I'm so sorry. So February 1st, we'll be doing a public information, thank you, Cynthia, on downtown housing plan. And it'll be, the invitations will go both electronically and in writing to all town meeting representatives and open to the entire town. Next Tuesday, we'll have complete details on both of those public information forums. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving right along, I believe that's your town manager comments, and we'll move, unless you have something else to talk about.
No, ma'am. Just a
Okay.
few announcements from Town Treasurer Collector Paula Newt. Paula Newt, the Treasurer Collector, issued the FY24 second quarter water, sewer, trash bills on November 14th, 23. The second quarter water, sewer, and trash bills are due December 14th, 2023. All unpaid water, sewer, trash bills will accrue interest at 14% from the first and second quarter's due dates. The water, sewer, trash bills may be paid by mail at Town Hall or dropped off in the drop box outside of Town Hall. Outstanding FY23 water, sewer, trash balances will be reflected on the FY24 third quarter real estate tax bills as a lien. Payments of the FY23 water, sewer, trash liens may be paid at the collector's office. Important point, please call the collector's office at 781-341-1300, extension 9222, to get the amount balance. The collector's office is now accepting payments by credit and debit cards in the collector's office for all tax and water, sewer, trash bills. There is a 3% fee if a card is used to make a payment. And that's it, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
We want to thank DPW for our hats. It's very exciting. We're going to wear them. Thank you. Moving to our next item, citizens' comments. Are there any citizens' comments? I'm looking online as well as in the audience. I see none. Just a minute. Consent agenda item starts at 7:20. I think we have 2 minutes. If that's okay? Okay. Our item number 5, consent agenda items, 5A. Approval of open session minutes meeting of November 21st, 2023. 5B, letter of support for restoration of the historical Gay Hurley McNamara barn. 5C, amendment to Class 2 license Frank's Quality Auto Sales LLC, 7 Cabot Place, Suite 5. Does anyone want to pull any of these items? Yes, Mr. Carrara.
I'm not pulling it. I'm just not going to take part in the minutes because I wasn't present, so I'll abstain from that vote.
Thank you.
Item B.
You would like to pull B?
Yes.
Okay, please. Mr. Gito, for discussion.
I reviewed the Community Preservation Committee's meeting where the issue of the barn was briefly discussed, and it was determined that the CPC would contribute $230,000 to tear down some portion of the building and stabilize the remainder for some use that may include some of the conservation land. But there are many unknowns in terms of what land would be used and what the use might be. The barn, as I think that we got information tonight, sits on a separate parcel of land which we own. I won't go any further into that. It was not shown as a separate parcel on the GIS information. And I had called Mr. Tisdale to let him know that that was a separate parcel. I'm not going to support a partial proposal, as we did with the town hall parking expansion, and tie it to something else that we don't know about. It's not good practice for this board, and it diminishes our stature in the eyes of the citizens and the town meeting members for us to sort of move piecemeal through a process when we don't know what the outcome is. And I would suggest that we table this item until we hear from, hear a full proposal on the, on this item. I mean, it seems as though there is a plan to use the barn, some portion of the barn, for the Center for an Agricultural Use of some of the town conservation land, that perhaps we can get someone to come in and farm that land. I've lived in that area for 75 years. The fields there are on a ledge. Hardly any of that land, the land has only, to my knowledge, been used for hay. I'm not sure that we would find somebody who would want to come in and have a hay farm there. I mean, we could go and ask the people who have been haying the fields for a long time how many bales they get and what the cost of the bales are, what the cost is and what the value is. Basically do some sort of a business analysis, a business plan for that, to find out whether or not it even makes sense to do such a thing. I mean, that would seem to be the start of putting together a proposal. I mean, goodness gracious. So I would suggest that we table this until we get the full package. But I won't make that motion because I know that maybe some other people would like to decide whether or not we should even do this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gito, for your comments. So, Mr.
Motion to be seconded for the tablement, or?
Well, I will
we have
do
two
that,
comments.
yes. I'll make a motion to do that, to table this until we get a full set of information.
If,
Yeah, he had his hand up before.
Okay, go ahead.
And then
I
Mark
will-
Tisdale had his
That's
hand
all I
up,
wanted to
too.
say, Madam Chair. Mark Tisdale's
Yeah,
online
I
if
saw
you need to
his,
speak with him.
wanted to recognize.
I didn't second it, so they can talk about it. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. I read this into the record, Madam Chair, on behalf of Dwight McCarran, President of the Historical Society, member of the CPC. And what I read into the meeting minutes, I believe, was just that, for us to support them in doing something. I would imagine that they're going to come back with a proposal of what that would be, ask for an endorsement. So when we make a comment from this table that we're not serving the citizens, I think exactly what we are doing is serving the citizens by allowing somebody to ask for our permission to do something. A couple of things were identified in what I read into the meetings, and I think that's exactly what we're doing. But here we go again of doing something that is not on the agenda. It's a consent agenda item. If we wanted to give this full debate, that would have been the thing, is to put it on a full issue and discuss it. But I'm not going to support any motion to do anything other than to offer our support for, as it was read into the meeting minutes, and allow them to come back and tell us what they want to do. I don't think that's too much to ask for. Somebody asked for our permission to look into doing something with it, fine, let's let them do something. If we don't like that, we vote it down if we want to, or, we let them go to CPC and, and let them, ask for the money directly, and then it's up to CPC.
Thank you, Mr. McCrisky. Before we proceed to Mr. Tisdale, I wanted to just read the letter. I don't think we all have the benefit of that. It says, the Stoughton Historical Commission requests the written support of the Select Board to support the following project. which is the subject of an application to the CPC and eventually an article at town meeting. This barn and the land immediately surrounding it is owned by the selectmen, not the Conservation Commission. We wish to restore the historical Gay Hurley McNamara barn on West Street for current day use while preserving its historical features. Using the report prepared by consultant Gail Thrachenberg of MMT, the project would encompass significant structural repairs as well as remedial brush clearing along with other exterior and interior work. The land would be used for community farming with a farm stand, and the barn would become a living example of Stoughton's agricultural heritage and serve as an education center open to the public. Part of the existing barn dates back to its original construction in 1805, with additions occurring over the years in the 1930s. The roof of the older portion would be reconstructed in keeping with the barn's design in order to keep it from collapsing. The oldest timbers would need to be restored along with their original templates. The newer portions of the building are structurally sound and would require less extensive work. Walls at both ends of the barn require stabilization to keep them from buckling. Excess materials not deemed to be historical value would be removed and discarded. The report cites potentially destructive plant overgrowth as needing to be controlled. The main front entry would need to be reconstructed in order to secure the building and make it safe for use. This barn is one of Stoughton's only remaining agricultural structures, illustrating in tangible form a key aspect of Stoughton's history, which has all but disappeared. And the building can be restored and used. It would bring that history alive for members of the public, including school-age children and others who have no living memory of a working farm in Stoughton. The community currently has no working farm or farm stand with produce grown on the premises. Many other towns do have such operations and are reaping their benefits. Healthier food options for their residents, a local connection to the land, and a better sense of their town's history. Having a community farm in Stoughton would keep more food dollars in the community and would provide a shared experience not currently available within Stoughton's borders. Sincerely, Dwight McCarron, Stoughton Historical Commission. With that said, Mr. Tisdale.
Can you hear me? All right, thank you. I did not have my hand up, but I don't mind commenting on this project. Just to clarify, this piece of land, that's 72,000 square feet of land with the barns on. It is not a separate subdivided lot, but there is an area designated for the care, custody, and control of the select board. The remaining 52 acres is the Conservation Commission land, but it's not a separate lot. We have confirmed that with the deed. I do love the idea of the use of the property. You know, it fits in with the character of the area. But yet again, we would want to treat this, and again, it's only the beginning stages, but as we move along, we would want to treat this like any other project that we put developers through. And if you have a proposed use, we want to see a site plan, you know, that shows where it is and what you're doing and things to do with the soils and underlying, structure of the soils to see if it can support an agricultural use.
Thank you, Mr. Tisdale. All right. Without any, okay, motion? I'm asking for a motion.
Motion to approve the request. This is on 7B, or is it A, B, and C? Did you want to do
we're discussing item B. That is what we are discussing.
Oh, yes, thank you. A motion on 5A, which is the approval of open session meeting minutes of November 21st, and item C, amendment to Class 2 license Frank's Quality Auto Sales LLC.
Madam Chair, currently on B, there is a motion awaiting a second.
Yeah, but
So if there's no second, then you can move on to the main motion.
There was no second, as I
if,
recall.
if I may, can we do them all individually, because
Oh, okay.
each and every one affects a different way. So I can't vote on the first one, so you might as well do that vote so that I can abstain, and then we can handle Lou's, because his is up on the floor, waiting for a second, and then we can do Mr. Mogan's, and then all three, there won't be any overlaps of how the votes went. That's what I would do, Madam Chairman.
Excellent. That would be excellent. So let's start with 5A, approval of open session minutes meeting of November 21st, 2023. Motion to approve. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well.
And I abstain, Madam
And
Chairman.
one abstention. Item 5B, letter of support for restoration of the historical Gay Hurley McNamara barn. There was a motion.
Motion to approve is submitted.
Can I get a second? I will second that. All in favor by roll call? Oh,
Can we have one discussion on that?
yes, we can.
Is the 230,000, is that in it from CPC, or is that just something that was discussed? That was the request?
If it wasn't approved, there's nothing to move forward on.
Okay.
I just can't see why we wouldn't vote it and let them go down that road.
Motion is on the table. It has been seconded. We've had discussion. Any other further discussion on this item? Were you going to say something, Mr. Coulter?
I think Mr. McCrisky said it.
Oh, okay.
That's a different path as this one. This is to offer support for the project. As Mr. Tisdale said, still needs to go through planning.
Yes.
And as Mr. McCrisky said, in terms of funding, it's under consideration by the CPC, which is outside of our purview.
Yeah. We're just voting on a letter of support. That's it. Any further discussion? Okay. Mr. Gito,
No?
Mr. McCrisky,
Yes?
Mr. Carrara,
No.
and I vote yes. Motion failed. Item number 5C, which is amendment to Class 2 license Frank's Quality Auto Sales LLC, 7 Cabot Place, Suite 5. Motion?
Motion to approve the name change?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving right along to item number 6 on our agenda. That's, we voted
already
A
voted.
first. We voted A first. A, it was approved with
One
one
abstention.
abstention.
It's either there's something wrong with the mics or people aren't speaking into them. I'm not getting.
Okay.
I'm speaking into mine.
You're welcome. That's all right. Item number 6, that is Town Manager's Fiscal Year 25 Operating Budget, Expenses, and first view of the revenue estimate. And I would ask Hannah York if you would like to move forward with with your
Very good, Hannah. So if you sit right up there.
It is so nice to meet you.
So if you push the button, Meg, why don't you sit up there as well, if you don't mind? Madam Chair, through you.
Yes, please.
So, Madam Chair, I'd like to introduce you to Hannah York and Meg LeMay. Hannah is a principal in CLA, Clifton, Larson, Allen, and Meg has been working on site here in Stoughton as we go through our budget process. Madam Chair, last Tuesday, we presented the manager's FY25 expense budget. Following Hannah's presentation of the FY25 revenue budget this evening, we will take questions on both the expense and the revenue side of the budgets. Next Tuesday, Hannah will join us, I believe, by video conference as we present the best practices in the management of joint costs, as written by her firm and others. Over the next several months, we will be working with the Collins Center to develop a financial policies and procedures manual. Additionally, we'll be working with CLA to develop a 5-year operating budget forecast. These two tools, once completed, are key to Stoughton's request for consideration of a higher bond rating, which of course will impact the cost of our borrowing on the new school projects and, should there be one, a police department project. Just a few words about the FY25 budget proposal, the manager's budget. Currently, the municipal budget increases 3.8% over FY24. We are not utilizing free cash as promised, and we expect to deposit $200,000 into our stabilization account as we attempt to get it up to 20%, a number key to the bonding agencies. We have reduced headcount from FY24 to FY25. We have settled union contracts and achieved labor harmony. We have addressed, most importantly, several inequities in employee wages and slowed the rate of employee attrition. That point is particularly important considering the cost to replace management personnel in any municipality. The cost of replacing a person who leaves almost always is significantly higher than the cost of the person who left. We have addressed the inflationary impact on materials and services with an aggressive purchasing strategy. The strategic investments in personnel reflect our firm belief that we can be more efficient, leaner, and constituent-centric. As we move forward into FY25, we plan to explore opportunities to reduce our fixed cost structure through regionalization. Specifically, we are looking for ways to leverage our huge investments in the V&A, engineering department, trash removal program, and in the water distribution system. Through strategic partnerships with neighboring communities, we believe that we can significantly reduce costs to Stoughton residents. Madam Chair, I would like to take this opportunity to once again introduce Hannah York and Meg LeMay from CLA. Hannah understands our strategy, has guided us through plan implementation, and will work with us in the development of our 5-year budget forecast. This evening, she will outline our macro plan and present our FY25 revenue forecast. Next Tuesday, as I said, she will participate in our presentation on best practices pursuant to joint costs and in our joint cost analysis. So with that, I turn it over to Hannah, and I am so going to enjoy just sitting here and watching you do this. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
And thank you, Meg.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the town asked me to come before you and help to not only talk about the revenue projection and looking at the future impact to the community, but also to talk about some best practices of both revenue and expenditure budgeting, and then to kind of cover some of the major drivers and major changes that we had for the FY25. Prior to going through that, though, I want to, we could skip that, that's just the legal stuff I have to put on all presentations. So I'm going to first kind of go through a brief intro just so you everyone on the board understands who we are, what we do, and, why we're here sitting and talking to you and not someone else. And then, like I said, we'll walk through some operating best practices and then talk through the major drivers, future recommendations, and then if there's any questions. Okay, so just as a brief background, CLA is a professional services firm, traditionally CPA firm, but we also offer consulting and other non-traditional services. Our team that Meg and I are on is 11 consultants that specialize specifically only in Massachusetts state and local government. We don't audit, we do consulting, whether that's interim financial positions, we do treasury, we do implementing. Historically, if you go back, CLA assisted with the implementation that the town went through to Munis, Tyler Technologies. So we do special projects like that as well, but we're 100% on state and local government. That's our passion, that's what we specialize in. And so the town had hired CLA to come in and help supplement some of the open positions. As Tom had discussed, there is some turnover within the town, so we initially were brought in to do that. And then also, since then, having discussions, going through this budget process, the town was very interested in having us assist with these best practices and financial management of the town, and how do we put the town in the best possible position going forward. So just from a very high level of operating best practices, and I think one of these is something that has already been discussed with the town from my understanding, but just a continued focus is to minimize the use of one-time funding for annual operating costs. That is not only just free cash, but that is also if you have one-time grants. I know over the last few years with COVID, there was a lot of one-time funding sources coming in. And so we can talk about, I'll actually get a little more in-depth with that. Thank you. A little farther into the presentation of, kind of future going forward. But in practice, you want to avoid adding positions, adding permanent long-term operating costs from funding sources if you don't have a plan to transition those costs into your normal operating budget once those funds are gone. So, for example, some communities hired additional police officers with their ARPA funds. Well, when the ARPA funds run out, how is that going to be paid for? So there's a concern for this, we call it the fiscal cliff, when those funds go away. So I think that is one of the biggest priorities in the discussions that we've had internally with the town, and also, just from my own practice, my own, history that I've done with other communities, is to try to pull completely out of using free cash and, one-time funds as much as possible. With Stoughton, historically having used it, it's difficult to make that a shift all in one year because you have to make up for those sources. But getting there as quickly as possible will also assist with the bond ratings. And if you have a large bond issuance coming up, such as a new school, possible other, improvements like the police station, it's important to try and get the highest possible bond rating, because that will affect your expenses for 20 to 30 years when you're talking a building bond. A few years ago, when the interest rates were exceptionally low, the difference between one rating to the next rating wasn't as big, but as those interest rates climb higher and higher, the gap between the different rating levels of where you're at on that scale does increase substantially. So it can be a large, if you look at the 30-year projection on it, it can be a very large number, moving just from one step to the next. So then the next piece of just best practices is to, at the initial part of the process, establish clear goals and objectives for the budget process, and to prioritize the spending based on the most critical needs of the government. And then also to look at historical data to say, how have we historically been spending, to help inform those projections. And then the last two items are really just involving the stakeholders, which would be the, the community, having these public forums to discuss, the department heads, which I think has already been done extensively, walking through all those different stakeholders to get everybody's perspective. And then what's very important as well is once you do have a budget in place, monitoring and evaluating that budget performance to make sure if you need to identify as early on any adjustments that may need to be made. Okay, so as far as the FY25 revenue projection that we went, I just wanted to kind of do first an overview of the methodology of what we used. The top one, once again, as discussed, reducing historical reliance on one-time source of funds such as free cash. That was kind of the number one goal first off. And we were, when we get to the numbers, you'll see that we were able to make a substantial decrease in that number. And then we did, as far as the local receipts estimates, historically, looking back over the past, and I think this is a good conservative estimate to use. The town has used 95% of your prior years. That's complete. So for this year, it would be for FY23 actuals. Utilizing that as 95%, unless there's some other unknown. Right now, things are on, projections post-COVID are starting to return to prior. So I think that's a good conservative use. However, there were a few specific areas within the local receipts that we knew we wanted to adjust further beyond that because of specific decisions that were made. So I will go through what those specifically were in a second. And then as far as, like I said, just conservative increase based on historical rates, unless we have those known changes. And then the last item was that what we want to move to, and what my recommendation for all of our clients is that for free cash, that you're utilizing that either for one-time expenses such as pay-as-you-go capital type projects or bumping up your stabilization funds. Similar to getting away from using free cash for operating, if instead the bond rating agencies see you, hey, I'm no longer using it for operating, but instead I'm setting it aside as a stabilization fund. And as you build up that stabilization fund, one of their factors that they use for rating is what percentage of your operating budget do you have set aside in your stabilization fund. So the higher you can get that balance, the better it will look, and that will definitely affect the overall rating for the communities. So hopefully you can read this. I know on the screen it's probably difficult, but I think everybody has a copy in front of them. But this kind of shows the overall, as we walk through from the top to bottom. You can sit there. I'm going to flip to the major drivers page just because it walks me through the specifics of what we did. But as you start out, as we know, the biggest driver is your tax levy. Tax levy is limited to a maximum of 2.5% of your prior year's levy under Prop 2.5. But then with that, and then any new growth. What we did for new growth was we looked at the 5-year average and took 95% of that. So if the 5-year average was $840,000, we used $800 as the estimated new growth. You still want to have a little bit of cushion in there if, say, the new growth comes in a little higher. Well, that can help offset other items that may happen between now and next year's recap that you may need. So that's for the tax levy. As you move on down to state aid, this early on in the process, we don't have any kind of projections for state aid. So in looking at history, looking at how it's gone, we used a 3%, which I think is pretty standard, that many of my clients use a similar assumption to start off. There are certain things that could affect it, more students, less students, more of, the maybe school choice, any of these other items that could affect that number. But until we get the most conservative approach is to use kind of this conservative 3% increase. When you look back over 5-6 years, there's only been 1 year that it basically held flat. All the other years it did increase. The last 2 years have been larger increases. Part of that was due to the foundation budget calculation being adjusted by DESE, and I don't think that is going to be a continuing, rate of increase going forward because they've. Oh, sorry.
Pull it a little closer, if you don't mind.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Is that better?
much better.
Okay. Sorry. So part of the reason why the last 2 years has had a larger increase in your state aid is because the DESE went through a process a few years ago of redoing their foundation aid budget. And so the underlying data within it changed it, which then required them to change how much funding they were giving for students. And so they spread it over a couple years to get that increase, so they weren't hit all in 1 year. And so I don't think that will be a continuing rate of increase, which is why we went back and looked at that 5-year, overall. For the local receipts, as I said in the earlier slide, for the majority of the local receipts, we used a 95% of FY23's actuals. The 2 exceptions to that are for the trash receipts. There was already a trash fee increase. So the estimate on that for that additional funds based on that increase was an additional $500,000 beyond, what we would have calculated out at that standard 95%. So we did add in that $500,000 increase into the estimated budget. And then the other piece was the interest income. A couple years ago, your interest income was about $40,000. That's when the rates were very, very low. The last 2 years you had, especially in FY23, had a much larger interest income. If we were to use the 95% of that, it would be a very big number. However, there's a few underlying pieces of information in there, part of it being there was a large bond issue that you brought in a kind of an influx of cash during that year that then, you had more cash in the bank, interest rates were rising, and so you had a much larger than typical interest income that 1 year. So what we're using for it, which we think is a much more doable, feasible, conservative approach, is using 25% of it based on the fact that we won't have as much cash in the bank because they've now spent down most of that capital money that was issued. And then also that the interest rates, while they may decrease a little bit, they'll stay fairly consistent, I believe, for the next year or so. And then the last piece is for the one-time sources, which, there's 2 buckets, and if we have any questions about the overlay surplus, I can definitely explain that, but there's free cash, and then there's overlay surplus, which is another one-time type use of funds. We reduced it in prior year, the total of all one-time funds was $2.3 million. We reduced that by $1.68 million. So there's still, I have to go back to the exact number. So $620,000 in one-time funds, which we're actually going to take out of overlay surplus and not take out of free cash. We're going to request a release of some excess overlay surplus because of some settlements that happened and that currently looking at any of the possible liabilities out there, you have quite a bit of a excess amount sitting in that fund. And then on the revenue projection other, I broke that out. That's basically the non-operating. So what we were looking at doing was trying to put in that budget a $200,000 transfer to your stabilization fund. Once again, that's a one-time revenue, one-time use of funds. Before I move on to the next, are there any questions so far from that?
Madam Chair, not a question, but a comment.
Yes, Mr. Coulson.
During the budget process last year, and I'm told for many previous years, the expense budget was done first, and then the revenues were determined based upon what we need, not based upon necessarily what we have. What we've asked Anna and Meg to do is we did the expense budget first, yes, but we asked them to disregard the expense budget in making assumptions in the revenue budget for FY25. So I would think I would characterize our revenue estimates as very realistic, not aspirational, not prayerful, but very very rational. So I think the net result of taking the use of free cash out of the budget and adjusting the overlay line item to a realistic number based upon historical use is good, prudent financial forecasting. From that perspective, we're at 3.8% growth over FY24 in the expense budget. We don't have any sense right now as to where the schools are. We're asking them to be 3.8%. If they come in at that, we're going to have a very strong, very sound FY25 operating budget without the use of free cash. One last comment on revenues. We are not, as we know, the schools are facing a real challenge with the impact of migration into Stoughton. It's a challenge in terms of curriculum and resources in English language arts. But it's not a fiscal challenge. The state is paying us $105 per student per day, which is substantially more than we get paid by the state for our regular day students. So those substantial revenues are not in this revenue forecast because even though school started in September, we haven't received a dime yet. So until we see it, we're not going to count it. But the state and the feds have provided reimbursement for the students that they're moving to Stoughton. So although there are many challenges, they're not financial challenges at this point in time. Thank you.
And so beyond the source of funds, there are a few use of funds that the town really can't control, or is not part of a typical budget. One of those is going to be the assessor's overlay. Historically, you've raised in the 700 to 800,000. That basically comes right out of the top of your revenue budget. So it's going to reduce how much is available for your operating. We readjusted that to be equivalent to what your 5-year usage average is. It's actually even a little more conservative than that. So that actually freed up almost $300,000. And then as far as the snow and ice estimated deficit, once again, 5-year, we looked at the 5-year average, reassessed that, and unfortunately that went higher, so it the difference between the overlay and the snow and ice adjustments just about netted out. And as Mr. Coulter said, the town's budget that we then put into this came out to 3.8%. On the joint budget, while it's not complete, there are some assumptions, basic assumptions in there. There are going to be some certain reduced costs within there that we are looking to try to offset any of the increases. So at this point in time, we're estimating basically a flat amount for that budget. So then, we're moving into the...
May I?
Oh, sorry.
Just add a little bit of detail to that. I know the board, the members are thinking about it, so I'd like to address it. Where are the reductions? So as you recall, last year we provided a $900,000 subsidy for water and sewer, specifically, I believe, for sewer. I think that's correct, isn't it? Not for water, for sewer.
Yes, sewer.
That subsidy is not in the joint cost structure right now because we don't need the subsidy because of the policy decisions that were made. The second area, and we haven't calculated this so completely, so don't quote us, but our healthcare membership has been reduced on the municipal side because of the opt-out program by 34, I'm guessing, 32 to 34 members. Those 32 members in the last full fiscal year cost us $898,000 in medical expenses. So the opt-out program has proven as a standalone cutout to be extremely beneficial to our cost structure. So we're waiting for Gallagher to give us some actuarial, is that the right information on their projections. But we think there'll be a couple of $1 million in joint cost savings that will help free up more on the top line that will flow down into the budgets, into the operating expense budget. So there's the details as to why we believe it will go down somewhat. Thank you, Hannah.
So as far as future recommendations, one of the things that we discussed with the town, and they're very much, we've had a lot of positive support for it, is looking at not just the one-year projection, but especially because you are looking to possibly have some large debt added, for the school and possible other buildings, is to do a 5-year forecast, and looking at several different scenarios. What can you do without doing any operating overrides? Are there possible or requirements or needs in the future to have overrides? How do you do it when you structure the debt this way? How do you do it if, whether it's 20-year or 30-year, based on different assumptions with your ratings, if you can get to a better rating? Looking at various scenarios like that I think it also helps with the next year's budget processes to say, hey, we're committed to getting rid of all free cash or overlay use for operating for next year. What does that look like if we keep on the current trajectory of what we're doing? And part of that is also not just looking at the dollars, but looking at population trends, bringing in the population trends, whether that's for elderly population, school-age population, any of those, the mix of types of population, and some will increase, school population is obviously going to increase your education costs. Elderly population will probably increase some of the ambulance services and cost associated with that. So looking at it from a holistic approach and trying to project out 5 years, I think is a really important step for the community to take to get into a long-term, safe, well-managed financial position. Along with that, developing standard policies around it. For example, free cash usage policies, saying, once we get to the point of not using it for operating, we're going to set a policy that a certain percentage of free cash might go to stabilization fund, just as an example. Another percent is set aside for capital outlay projects. So there's different types of policy decisions that can be made there. You could also roll in, say, we want to have a 20% stabilization fund balance compared to our operating budget. And then just and once you get there, then you could start moving it into an OPEB stabilization, which once again will help on your financial picture, your bond ratings, any of those items. So documenting the fiscal management policies and procedures for the community will help even in the very, very earliest stages of the budget process. And then finally, not to harp back on it, but is going back to making a policy of not adding positions based on one-time grant funds or one-time sources of revenue unless those positions are tied to it. In other words, it's a contractual position that once the grant or the other source of fund is gone, that position is no longer there. So that is one of the other recommendations that I think the town should consider for moving forward. And that is the last of it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to discuss.
Madam Chair, one more comment before questions, if I may.
Yes.
Just to clarify another point. As Hannah knows, in this community, there has been this perception that it's the municipality versus the schools. I want to clarify that notion once and for all. I've been talking since the day I arrived about removing free cash from the budget. I've informed people of warnings given to us by the bond agencies about removing free cash and increasing stabilization at 20%. As we gave guidance to our department heads on this budget, we asked for level services with a commitment to bring it in at less than 4%, and we're at 3.8%. Those actions were as much in support of the needs of the schools than anyone can believe. And let me give you the example. If we're successful in getting town meeting approval to build the South School, a 1-point difference on the cost of debt and a 20-year amortization schedule versus a 20 would save us upwards of $20 million on the construction of that school. $20 million. That's why we're trying to manage a budget and a process with a long-term vision towards stabilizing, not only stabilizing town finances, but presenting Stoughton as one of the most fiscally well-planned out municipality on the South Shore. And if we do that, we'll not only be able to borrow money, we'll have people coming to us begging to lend us money at favorable terms. This plan, this fiscal plan, can't be just for the municipality or just for the school system. It's got to be for the town of Stoughton to serve the greater good, educational and otherwise, of the town of Stoughton. And so that's why I've asked Hannah and Meg to work with us on developing policies and procedures. Superintendent has promised to engage in this process. He's got his school committee meeting tonight, or he would have been with us tonight. He will be with us for the joint cost meeting next week. But if we're able to, and I wish I could think of words that would keep me out of trouble on this, if we could reach an agreement on joint costs, not to go into schools or go into the town, but to go into joint costs where they belong, it allows us to keep our budgets at a more meaningful level. Right now, we've got joint costs of more than $1 million. We've got school expenses of more than $1 million embedded in the town budget. That's indisputable. And when we talk next week, you'll see it. There's nothing nefarious going on here. Nobody tried to do that. That's just where years of practice have left us. It's hurting our ability to build South School if we don't address and fix that. And so that's what next week's meeting is about. Not to give them more expense and us less expense, not to give us more expense, less expense. It's to put it in the appropriate bucket so that we have credibility with the bonding agencies. What bucket it finds itself in is very important to the bonding agencies. How we spend our money is very important to the citizens of Stoughton, and by extension, to the bonding agencies. So this policy can't be for just one side of the house. Once we get through this budgeting process, the superintendent and I have promised each other they'll work together. And next week's meeting on joint costs, nobody should be stressed. If we don't change anything that impacts anybody's bottom line, just getting it into the right bucket will be a major step forward. I just wanted to say that before we move on with questions for the real professionals in the room. Madam Chair, through you, any questions on either the operating budget, the expense budget, or the revenue forecast?
Yes, I had several questions, but before I do my fellow board members have questions? Yes, Mr. Carr.
I served on FinCom for 9 years, and a financial planning scheme was talked about probably my last 3 years from one individual. And I'm so glad that we're now into that, because prioritization was always what I thought, not what everybody wanted. What are our priorities? And we had voted that 300 in free cash comes right off the top, and we put it in stabilization. We would like to have done more, but you're up against it, and you have to use it, the one-time monies. And I was always taught free cash isn't free. So I'm glad we're at this here. I hope that we get something down and hard, and it looks like you guys know where it's going to go and where it's going to start. And I know Tom is very adequate in that area, so I think we're probably in a good spot to do what Tom says might happen. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Yes, Mr. McCrisky.
You know, I think just it goes without saying, just to back up Scott as well. And when I was on the Finance Committee, a little difference in finances then. But I just think it's important that we point this out, that we're at this point due to the hard work of our new town manager, and his staff, and building working relationships at both ends of Pearl Street, which has not existed in a long time. So again, I would be remiss if I didn't point out, so the people of the town know that the issues that have plagued us in the past of not being able to get together and communicate are ending. And as they say, a new sheriff in town. This sheriff has a different way of doing things, and he does it with kindness and professionalism. And it goes a long way when you do that. And Tom, once again, I just have to point that out and say thank you for what you've done in your role. Thank you. And thank you for your work as well. It's nice to have somebody that's the next level up. The reports that I read sometimes aren't as good as I would like to see. And we've turned the corner on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carrera. Mr. Gito? I could go next if you're still preparing. Okay. Thank you so very much for your presentation. I agree with my fellow board members, their comments. Mine is a little more detailed. It's more, what is your philosophy? And I'm also asking Mr. Coulter, what is his philosophy on OPEC? The pension plan, we're in a deficit, so what is your philosophy on paying that down? Some tend to think that it's hopeless because it's so huge, but a little bit goes a long way. But what is your philosophy?
Madam Chair, Hannah is going to tell me what my philosophy is in just a second.
There we go. We're waiting. It's a cliffhanger. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, and just a little bit of extra background too, just so you know that we do work with a lot of different communities, and I really enjoy consulting because we can, not only do we go in and help assist communities, but we're actually able to learn from different communities, in every consult. So just as an example, in any given year, we work with anywhere from 45 to 60 cities and towns in Massachusetts. So, we have a very wide range of different types of communities and what we see there. And I would say, I think the first most important thing is to get your pension plan, up to get that deficit fixed up if there is any. And then as soon as you get to 100% funded on your pension plan, then you turn around and move to the OPEB. And I think any amount of movement, even if you can only put $10,000 a year in a pension stabilization fund or OPEB stabilization fund, any amount of movement is going to look positive because you're moving somewhere. You're not just ignoring it. You're not just burying your head in the sand, right? And saying, oh no, we'll never be able to get out of this, even if it's just $10,000. And I have communities that do that. And that's a small amount of money, but it's better than not putting anything in there. And so I think once you get to that 20% for your regular general stabilization, which the bond raters want to see, then you turn around to adding more into the OPEB and more into some of these other specific buckets that there may be.
So really it's about consistency.
Yes.
And we're building that in? Okay.
Yeah, and having that documented in your financial policies and procedures is huge for the bond raters.
Excellent.
And then, fulfilling what you're saying you're going to do, right?
Madam Chair, we met with bond counsel or a financial advisor, Cinder, and she made that point over and over again. She said it's not so much as the amount as the consistency of a contribution of some amount towards OPEB, that it's the perception to the bonding agencies that we are a very prudently, fiscally responsible organization, and that we're consistent. It's not just, and that's why it must start with the policies of this board. We are the policy maker. I'm sorry, you are the policy makers. So all of us can go off in different directions when we leave here, but if there's a policy that's passed by the board, financial or otherwise, everybody has to work within those confines. And that's why working with the Collins Center on the policies and procedures manual and working with CLA on our long-term 5-year operating budget forecast, that's the type of certainty and consistency that we've been told by the bonding agencies they're looking for, more so than even the numbers, the behavior.
So that is a catalyst to a question I didn't anticipate. So for our development of our policies, especially our financial policies, what's the timeline to have those completed?
We were just granted $30,000 to hire the Collins Center. They've done this for dozens and dozens of communities. We've got sample policies that we're using as a starting point. We're not trying to begin organically. There are best practices that have been adopted by many successful communities. The Collins Center is going to begin work on the first of the year, January 1st, and we expect to be done by the spring town meeting and have this board vote on that policy manual and then go through it before town meeting and then go through a series of information sessions with every stakeholder to make sure they know what the policies of this board are with respect to building our budgets, what our priorities are, and how we spend money.
That's good news. Thank you very much for sharing that. The next question I have is regarding funding from the state regarding the migrants. So I know it's not included in these estimates, but it's really about we're doing the work now, but what are they saying regarding how can you plan? What's the timeline? We're doing the work. They're telling us we're doing the work, but how do you plan around that? It's new, so.
And typically
but what do you think, and what have you
unpredictable.
heard?
So, Madam Chair, some news that we were just briefed on yesterday. There are 32 additional students moving into Stoughton on Monday, I believe. They're being transferred to Stoughton from Seekonk into the Ramada Inn, and everything's being consolidated at the Ramada Inn. That'll give us, I believe, the superintendent said, 89 students, which is a huge amount of students, non-English speaking students, to matriculate through all grades in a very short period of time. The good news is the children that are coming from Seekonk have been in ELA training and English speaking classes since September, which is a break. The superintendent is courageously trying to deal with the staffing demands put on his team, and if anybody can lead the schools through that process, it's Superintendent Joe. As you know, and I'll just announce, we plan to meet with the governor in the next 30 days to find out what the governor's plan is for Stoughton. As this board has pointed out to me, we're kind and welcoming people that's committed to ELA, but there is a limit to what we can manage in Stoughton. And our concern is with the recent announcement of the Sinai Hospital that the state and the federal government may target that as a residential home for our incoming children, incoming families. And again, the town of Stoughton has always been, as I recall from being a young boy and young man in Avon, a very kind, welcoming, and gracious community. But the schools can only handle so much. So in direct response to your question is Superintendent Baeta is drafting a letter to DESE and to the legislature and to the administration expressing their deep concerns for our ability to successfully matriculate all of these students through Stoughton. Again, the financial piece is unrelated. It's a processing and educational component. And once that letter has been received, the chair has asked me, and I've agreed to set up a meeting with the governor and the governor's staff to express our deep concerns for how much is too much, how much is our warm welcome being used as compared to other towns of our size and capacity. So we're not for or against the process. We just need to do it well. And our school system is committed to doing it well. But there's a limit to what we can do well. And so that's where the discussion's going, Madam Chair, and I hope to have that date set up with the governor or the governor's representative in the next 30 days.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coulter. Yes, planning is very important, and we're planning for our budget. And with that said, coupled with your comment, should we increase or make any kind of changes to our operational expense budget?
Not on the town side, perhaps on the school side, but therein lies the difficulty. We know what we're going to receive in reimbursement from the state who gets it from the feds. So when we have that exact number of children, we'll know, and the exact per day reimbursement, we'll know what the increased revenues are, and it can be increased in our revenue projection to offset any expenses, unforeseen expenses in the school budget. We checked with police and fire. There's not an unusual expense on our other public safety resources at this point. I know there's a perception that there probably is. There just hasn't been. So there has been no impact, a limited impact on the municipal side, but there's a significant impact on the school side. And any revenues we get from the state and feds would be used to offset the school expenses that are being incurred to address the needs of the schools in relationship to the new students.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add a thing? This is once again a newer, bigger issue that's been climbing, and certainly larger dollar values. But a few years ago, there was a similar type program for the U.S. Virgin Islands when they had some families were shifted up here after, I believe, the hurricane down there. And the way it was run was through actually a grant. So the funds that were reimbursed to the communities went into a grant fund, and then you would just reclassify expenses out of your operating, so it wouldn't necessarily affect the operating piece of it. They may or may not handle it the same way. They haven't sent the money yet, they haven't sent the guidance yet, but it's possible that it would be peeled out that way, and that way you wouldn't necessarily have that direct impact on the your operating fund. It would be run through basically a grant program.
That would be great.
I would, if it were up to me, if, the state listened to my opinion, for whatever's that worth, that's definitely how I would do it as well, because especially if you're getting it after you've settled your tax recap and,
right,
you don't have the opportunity to adjust your, budget anymore, it makes sense to do it that way. But, we know it's not always based on sense.
That's why we hired the manager.
I see that, absolutely.
Mr. Gito's been pushing me to hire consultants for a long time.
I have been doing that.
You have? Yeah, that's great. That was, Lou, that was a compliment.
That was a compliment. I knew that was a compliment to Mr. Gito.
Me too. I have a couple questions. The first is that we were able to get through some tough times this past couple of years because the money for Chapter 70 came in and couldn't all be spent by the schools. I think this year probably they're in a position where they, in fact, can and should be using that money because that money is to go for the needs of a different population than they had before. And if we don't recognize that, we're taking away from all of the students that we've been dealing with in the past. Your look at the town, has it recognized that shift that has to occur back to the schools from what the town has been able to use the money for?
Well, a couple comments. I wasn't as involved with the budget on the expenditure side. I was more highly involved with the revenue projection side, but I can also explain some of what happened over the last few years. I think part of it is the schools were getting so much, and I worked with, I think we have 35 communities that we're assisting them with their ARPA funds. And then we're also managing the 4 counties. So we're seeing a lot of, work with both the ARPA funds, ESSER funds, all these other buckets that the schools were getting in that, quite frankly, many of the districts weren't able to spend all the grant money that they were getting because there was so much. That's now dried up. And so they're having to now shift those focuses back to, how do we pay all these expenses out of our direct operating fund? So from a revenue perspective, my recommendation there would be is when we do find out what the first pass at the budget and the state aid comes in at, that if there is a big jump in that Chapter 70, then that should be then adjusted to assist with, with those additional educational costs. But we have to start with some semblance of a estimate and not overpromise early on, right, at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Second question. I think the town has found over the last few years that, and I could be wrong on this, and I'd be happy to be corrected. I'd be very happy to be corrected. That it's harder to find land to develop here than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And you say that that you're using the last 5 years of growth in order to be able to project ahead. I'm seeing a number of properties that I'm dumbfounded to believe that that a house is going onto a piece of land that is at this angle, and they fill in a whole lot in order to be able to build. Have you taken that into account? And well, let me ask the question differently. You deal with a number of communities. Are many of your communities in a similar situation to Stoughton?
So I have some communities that are in, closer into the city, yes. I also work with some that are out in the country, so, land's not a problem. What I would say with that is a couple things. First, using the 5-year projection, we are pulling in to that projection the COVID years, right? And there was a lot of building, all that stopped or highly slowed down. So you have a certain amount of conservatism built into that already because of those kind of 2 years where we had lower than normal. The other aspect of it is new growth is not necessarily building brand new buildings. It could also be additions, improvements. It could be taking an empty building that you currently have and turning it into condos. So it could be existing structures, but just making enough of an improvement that it creates new growth for the community. So there's, several different aspects there. And, I think that using the number we have and looking at the historical 5-year average, I think is still a conservative approach based on the 5 years that we have.
One more question. Deborah asked, the chair asked a very important question. You answered it. I don't understand your answer, quite honestly, because the unfunded liability seems to be huge. I don't know what it is. Do you know what it is for Stoughton? Do you have any clue?
I don't know the exact number, but I can tell you every client I work with has a huge number. And I think there's a balance of, it can be overwhelming for some communities to look at that number. But at the same time, you have to, some of it is accounting calculations, right? So it's
what?
Accounting calculations, right? So you're getting numbers from actuaries, and they can, the underlying assumptions can, translate to different numbers, up or down, depending on the assumptions that are used. So that's where I think that, yes, you're never going to be able to say, unless you're, a very wealthy community, you're not going to get to 100% fully funded OPEB liability. It's just not attainable. But most communities are more in this pay-as-you-go and then also tuck away a little extra if they can. And I think that's, really until you get all the other pieces settled that are more, immediate direct needs, that's the approach that you have to take. We fund what we can as we go. We tuck a little aside extra as we're able to. And there's kind of chip away at it over time.
Do you have a list of communities that have a high amount of payment into that, or have a low amount of debt in that area? Is there a let me phrase it differently so I don't put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Is there a database that has that information that I could look at? I mean, I am incredulous on this point, and so I need to know. I really need to know.
So the difficulty there is with, so there's GASB accounting, which is what your financial statements, and hopefully if I get too accounting speak, just please stop me. But there's GASB accounting, which is what your financial statements are built off of. That's what goes to the bond raters. That's what, most communities post those on their website for availability. GASB accounting is an accrual-based accounting or modified accrual-based accounting system. And then we have UMIS accounting, which is what the state requires your books to be kept at here in Town Hall. So when you're using Munis, entering journals, cash receipts, all that, you have to follow the state's UMIS accounting. UMIS accounting is cash basis or modified cash basis. So a lot of these things that we're talking about, like the OPEB liability, pension liabilities, those don't get recorded into your town financial, softwares. So the only place they really exist is in the financial statements. The state has a fantastic repository of data that they pull in, but it's all UMIS accounting data. So they don't have that repository for these other adjustments that are made just for your financial statements for GASB. GASB is the Government Accounting Standards Board, that they make the requirements for how financial statements are presented. So to my knowledge, there is not one single place. What you can do is go to each, various communities, typically, and hopefully they have those financial statements posted on their website and you could go and look at them. But I don't know of anywhere that just has it offhand listed by community. I don't have any that I know of for sure that are 100%. I've heard that there's a few very wealthy communities that have fully funded their pension and have a large chunk of their OPEB. I don't know the numbers exactly, but like one of the examples that I've heard of that is, working towards that is Wellesley. So some of the wealthier communities may be there, but I think the vast majority are not. So I hope that helps some.
I'm afraid it doesn't help an awful lot, but that's not your problem. That's mine.
Madam Chair, I think I can sum up this on a very positive note in response to Lou's issue. And I've learned that I'm not going to disagree. I'm going to share information that will make everybody happy. The recap showed some charts. And the charts, although it showed a slowdown in individual housing startups, showed a substantial increase in commercial development. And as you know, we have a split tax rate. So that is a very, very good financial outcome for us. Due to really Joe's efforts, in the next 18 months, we'll be in the ground on almost 1 million square feet of commercial space at the higher tax rate with no TIF. With 3 separate projects, 1 million square feet. That's not even calculated in the tax recap. So in terms of new growth, putting aside the residential single housing units for now, the reason we're having the February 1st forum, as you well know, is because the community has to make a decision on what we want to do with our downtown once and for all. If we're able to develop, let's call it 200 market rate condos at the old theater. I can't even begin to calculate what the tax revenue new growth that would be, and that's a project that would be done inside of 18 months to 2 years. The commercial growth I talked about that Joe's involved with, the senior living facility that's going to be going up in the next 12 months is not a nonprofit, it's taxable. We've got substantial commercial new growth. The expansion of water and sewer down Park Street is sure to create other significant commercial projects. I don't think there's a town within 20 miles of us that has got greater prospects for economic development and increased revenue stream than we have in Stoughton right now. We won't see it in single-family homes, but we can see it in market rate condos and we can see it in commercial square footage. And that's pretty exciting. If we combine conservative budgeting and fiscal conservativeness with rapid new growth, Stoughton, as I said at town meeting a year ago, will be the shining bright light on the hill. And I see that in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter. Mr. Gito?
Yes. Mr. Town Manager, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that, and that's extremely helpful. My question was on the unfunded liabilities for our pension system. And so that's a different issue than the one that you dealt with, I
But
think.
the question before that, Mr. Gito, was how confident are you of the revenue stream?
I appreciate.
I was answering the question before that.
Yes, and I appreciate you doing that.
Sorry, could I just add one thing to that? I think moving away and what our goals of getting away from using the free cash will then free up more money to put into additional stabilization and be able to start chipping away more and more at that OPEB. And I think that's part of the goal, is to be able to do that.
Thank you very much. I was just reminded that Mr. Gito said he had to leave a little bit early tonight. And with that, Mr. Coulter, are there any other items that you wanted to discuss tonight? I'm just trying to get a handle on the timeliness of our.
No items to discuss, Madam Chair, just a bit about the process. So next Tuesday, we'll do a similar presentation. Hannah and Meg will be involved in joint cost policies, procedures, best practices, and then a summary of the real numbers. We don't have to make any decisions on reallocation, just what are the numbers. After that,
The 19th.
on the 19th. On the 29th, we'll be turning the manager's budget, operating budget, which includes expenses, revenues, joint costs, as well as the 5-year capital plan, over to the board. The board then has the opportunity to amend it any way you choose, any way you choose at all. Is completely at your discretion. And then 2 weeks after that is when you turn it over to the Finance Committee and the hearings begin. That's all I wanted to add.
So on the 19th, we'll have another opportunity to ask more questions about the revenue estimates, our operating.
Expenses, everything.
Everything.
It remains open until the manager's office turns it over to the board, and then you have 2 weeks. We've already incorporated most of your recommendations. Scott had some, Lou had some, Joe had a couple, I think you had a couple.
Yes, I did.
All those changes we've incorporated to this new budget you have.
Okay.
You'll have others as you look through it. We invite you to make whatever suggestions you want. If we agree with your suggestion, we put it in there. If we don't agree with your suggestion, we don't put it in there. But then when it's turned over to you, you do as you please.
All right. So
Thank you.
So with that said, do we have any other select board business tonight, or are we going to adjourn?
I have a question.
Sure, Mr. G.
I'm sorry. Is it okay to send you suggestions and for you to share those suggestions with the rest of the board so that when we come together, we know what the issues are and perhaps have had a chance even to look at what the implications might be of those changes.
Absolutely, Mr. Gito. If you send them to me, just so that we protect ourselves from open meeting law, what I will do is send your suggestions. First of all, yes, I would appreciate that. But then we're going to send your suggestions out to the other board members. I will forward them, so you're not accused of collaborating. I'll forward them, and so everybody will be fully informed to have a discussion at the next meeting, or at every meeting, the next one and the 19th. Or the next one is the 19th. So the answer is yes and yes.
Thank you.
All right. Motion to adjourn?
So made.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you, everyone, and see you on the 19th. Bye-bye.
Deborah, I said when Tom sends all those things to you guys, I won't read them, so I'll bring you guys a happy mail